we're going to talk about particularly ordinances that have to do with the watershed. We want to protect Lake Thunderbird, which is the source of our drinking water. So, with that, I believe that Susan Connors, Director of Planning, is going to do our PowerPoint presentation, and then we will have a discussion after that. I will allow for some members of the audience to ask questions or maybe state their feelings at the end of this meeting. I will ask everybody to be very short, but we will not do that till the end of the meeting. So this isn't a question and answer. This is us working on these issues. And I'm glad Mary Frances is here with her antlers on.
Hey, reindeers need fresh water clean too.
They do. They do. Okay. Ready?
Just as way of background, the Oversight Committee has discussed the oil and gas ordinance amendments. They discussed them in May and August of 2014, primarily fencing in August, and then in September, we started talking about the watershed drilling. The committee requested that staff meet with local oil and gas operators to get their input on our proposed ordinance amendments. And committee also requested that staff draft amendments to clean up and modernize our ordinance. So staff did meet on October 23rd with the oil and gas operators. At the September committee meeting, staff was asked to draft amendments in the following areas: regarding the insurance requirements, a spill contingency plan, compliance with the WQPZ requirements, steel containment systems, storage of chemicals in original containers, and then best practices for water protection. At the November 2014 meeting, the committee reviewed the draft ordinance and then asked staff for more information on the following topics: fencing, water testing, water quality protection zones and stream planning corridors, waivers, and insurance requirements. Regarding fencing, which we have been talking about since May of this past year, we now have added specific requirements that the materials and design of the fence be heavy, commercial grade chain link posts set in concrete, with posts set in concrete, 9-gauge tension wire around the bottom of the fence, and removable panels on the front and side would be allowed for maintenance of the well site. The fence is required for the wellhead and for the tank battery areas. These can be fenced separately. And the fence can be waived by a property owner within 600 feet of a well site when it's located outside the current urban service area, and I'll show you that area in just a moment. The fence is required, however, when a well site is within 600 feet or less, or is 600 feet or less from the center line of a public roadway. We changed that from the language we had previously, rather than saying visible from a public roadway, because that was very difficult to determine. There was a map. Chemicals for testing, we did speak to Dr. Poltz regarding this, and it suggested that we test for bromide, chloride, total dissolved solids, methane, iron, manganese, arsenic, boron, and lithium. There needs to be one test prior to drilling, and then propose 3 tests post-drilling in years 1, 3, and 5. We looked at several other states and how they propose this, and this, falls well within the guidelines of those other states and how they test post-drilling. No testing if access is denied by the property owner, so we would not force that on the property owner. The test results would be filed with the city upon completion, and we determined with our investigation that cost per test ranges from $350 to $400. Primarily, this testing accomplishes 2 primary objectives. One, it engenders the public trust because we're looking at these different chemicals, and it provides protection also to the oil and gas industry as to what was there prior to the drilling and what's there after during those first years. This is a map of all our groundwater wells. It includes public water wells, City of Norman water wells, and domestic wells that The source for, primarily for the public wells and domestic was from the OWRB, Oklahoma Water Resources Board. That's the only source that we have to determine where these wells are located. And the red dots are oil wells, and we've identified that quarter-mile oil well buffer where the water wells would be tested within that quarter-mile buffer of the oil wells. When we began talking about the water quality protection zones, we had determined that that terminology was inappropriate because a water quality protection zone does not come into play until the land is platted. Many of our wells are not on platted land. So there is a drilling prohibition in this ordinance on land designated as a stream planning corridor. And the stream planning corridors we're talking about correspond to the drainage areas that drain into Lake Thunderbird. So the stream planning corridors, that's what it says. We also need to consider an amendment to Chapter 22, which is our floodplain ordinance, to clarify that the floodplain permits for drilling will not be granted in stream planning corridors. So we think that there might be an amendment to Chapter 22 also. So we have handed out to you a substitute page 14, which clarifies that the stream planning corridors that we're talking about. Oh, that clarifies that we're talking about on this map the stream planning corridors that drain into here they are that drain into the watershed, and that would be all the stream planning corridors on the west side of Lake Thunderbird. And so that language corresponds to the WQPZ zones. So there is a small portion of the stream planning corridors on the back side of the lake that do not flow into Lake Thunderbird. They are not in the Lake Thunderbird watershed or drainage area. It's not a watershed, it's a drainage area. So we have corrected some language to clarify that. Okay.
Now, let's just clarify, we did that so it matched with the WQPZ language that we had before. Now certainly if the Oversight Committee wants to expand what we drafted before, so it also includes those stream planning corridors that do not drain into Lake Thunderbird, then we can draft it differently, but we're just trying to match what we had earlier. Any questions about that?
Where
We
does
talked about that.
I think it's important where that area drains to. It doesn't drain to it doesn't affect our water supply, but where does it drain to?
South Canadian.
It affects somebody else's water down the street.
Runs up.
And that's the why.
It also affects the ecology of the river.
I'm not sure why we would limit it solely to Lake Thunderbird. It should be within the city limits.
Right. We were just drafting to match what was in there before, but if you want to expand it, we can modify it. I think it makes sense to expand it.
We also looked at insurance. Pollution liability insurance can be included via an endorsement or a separate policy. For instance, if a company operates less than 10 wells and they purchase $5 million pollution policy, the annual premium would be between $5,000 and $7,500. This excess pollution coverage is expensive and difficult to obtain because not very many insurance companies we found really handle this type of insurance. So in Oklahoma, it's not easy to get this and it's expensive. And then because all circumstances are different, there's no one policy that would cover the exposure or premium that might be on any other well. So we can't give you a definite, there's no definite expense that would be for one well, would be for all wells.
What are some of the circumstances that can be flooded,
To give this type of policy. I think it's the type of company, how many wells they operate,
some level of pollution liability in the ordinance, do we not?
I believe
And then just people are behind it
right,
someplace.
it's $1 million, comprehensive.
And that's my recollection.
It is $1 million right now, so.
That's just the jobs are already currently required that.
Right, currently required.
We're going to 5 million? No more seconds.
I mean, I
That's
asked
the
the question at the last
example.
meeting, whether that was sufficient for the level, and then staff gets an additional report to find out. that- But are you saying that there aren't providers or insurance companies that will write at the $5 million level? I mean, obviously, if we're requiring a $1 million,
Right.
somebody's providing this.
Right, I don't think we're saying that, I just think that we're saying it's not a coverage that every insurance company offers. And that, you know, cost-wise, depending on the types of insurance, this is a more expensive type of insurance to obtain.
But you didn't ask do we know what the premium would be for them at what it currently is at the $1 million level? I
I do
mean,
not.
if it's $4,500 and it's $1,000 to go to the next level.
I don't have that figure for you.
There might be some operators that
Yeah.
will be able to answer that.
Do any of the operators that are here, any of you all know what the $1 million policy is a year?
No, it's part of the broad policy, so I don't know.
What's part of the whole policy? Okay.
Are we saying it's expensive, or are we saying it's $5,000 to $7,000?
Well, we're saying for, if you have less than 10 wells, it could be between $500 and $7,500.
In comparison to the revenue of the well, what is that?
Depends on the size of the well.
Well, I mean, no, but if it's expensive in comparison to something. So I'm trying to figure out, I mean, if a house costs $5,000, that's cheap. I mean, if a watch costs $5,000, that's expensive. So,
I think where we got that terminology is I believe they call the person who does these type of insurance coverages, and I think they're out of Lindsay, if I remember right. I think that was in your materials that was sent you. And that was what they told us, is that there's not that many carriers that write it, but it's expensive. So that was their terminology. I don't think we dug into in relation to how much revenue you get per well, whether it's a stripper well or whether it's a larger producer. I think we got into there. But we can, I mean, if you want us to.
Well, I think it's important to remember that if there's this liability, environmental liability, that premium represents a cost to our community, of the risk of that kind of disaster. And so if they don't have to pay the insurance to cover the cost, then the community simply bears that cost. And the well could easily, could continue to operate at a very low level, I would assume, making very little money for anyone. But the community continues to bear this risk. What I say the risk is $5,000 to $7,000 a year. It actually is more efficient, I think, if my economics lessons are sinking in, to have those costs built in to the operation of the well, so they carry their own insurance costs, and that's the right number, than it is to let them operate passing those costs off on the community. So I don't think they're expensive. If they're real costs, they're just real costs, and they should be incorporated in the operation as well.
And this is insurance that's not borne by the mineral rights owner, it's borne by the company, correct? The drilling company.
But since this is part of a package, we don't really know what their whole, the sum total of the insurance that they have on the well. We don't know what those other things are. We know for injuries, and we know for pollution.
What do we have, is $1 million comparable to other cities in the area? Is it, what do we have to share that?
Well, you may recall, and I think we had some figures from the staff, and they range quite a bit. $1 million is probably very similar to other cities in and around this area. But there are examples, in the Okay, was it London one and down in Texas, much higher levels?
Pulling that chart,
Norman is $1 million, Oklahoma City, and this is just pollution coverage, Oklahoma City is $1 million, Edmond is $1 million. Lawton was $5 million, Tulsa is $1 million, Moore is $1 million. In Texas is $1 million. McKinney, Texas was $1 million for loss with a $10 million annual aggregate.
So $1 million is the typical amount.
Could be sufficient,
Yeah.
Is there any legal problem of just setting the 5 million for ones that are, will put at risk our water because they are pre-existing in stream planning corridor? Within a certain proximity of a lot of domestic municipal wells, there may be legal problems with that.
It's a little different.
Recognizing that the risk is not the same for every well. For those that are further away and not putting it on.
Yeah, the difficulty we're gonna run into is the wells that were drilled under prior ordinances that were in effect had certain requirements, and when they met those requirements, then they were able to drill the wells and become producing. So if we add additional requirements on top of that, that makes it so they can't operate, and we're gonna end up getting some taking claims, those types of things, that say, you know, we already had a right to drill and produce, and now you're regulating us out to a position where we can't continue to use that property that they had a right to use. I mean, that would be my concern. If we get too far out where we're actually shutting them down, we put ourselves at risk in that type of legal argument.
To win that argument, what would we have to show? We raised these thresholds and we won, what would we have shown?
Well, I'll certainly research that some more for you and get back to you.
Well, can we show that our policies are reasonable and they're based on fact and they protect the public interest? Wouldn't that help us win? I mean, isn't that the kind of arguments we need to win?
That would be an argument we would make. It's necessary to protect the public interest. And the other side of that argument is, you're welcome to protect the public interest, you just have to pay us for our property. It's not a whole lot different than if you put a roadway through and you take a portion of someone's property to build a roadway. You're allowed to take the property as a government entity, but you have to pay fair compensation.
The only
So
piece,
that's the risk I'd be a little concerned about.
the only piece of information I've heard that makes me think that there's a reason for us to bump it up would be Lawton does 5 million, why does Lawton do 5 million? Is there something specific about Norman that, I understand we're protecting the public, what we really want though is not a big insurance policy, what we really want is that the wells are operated in a safe and environmentally sensitive way, that's what we really want. So, I don't want to just be raising it, to be raising it, there needs to be some kind of
I mean, I would
reason.
like to know what Lawton's rationale was in establishing theirs. And again, I'm not suggesting this is a blanket increment, but I am concerned about those, again, that are most closely, in close proximity to a stream or a drainage. I mean, I'm okay to leave it at $1 million. I would like those other pieces of information.
So leave it at $1 million, but go ahead and
Well, I
research
mean,
that
I'd like to, I mean,
additional
I'm,
information.
you know, I'm inclined to concede the argument. I would like to know why Lawton did what they did. And whether or not there's, you know, that there's a water-related motivation that they have. I mean, that's what we're talking about here.
Another thing that we've been looking at are waivers. Human Resources requested an amendment to the waiver process. One thing that we were asked about was the size of a well pad. We don't have a There's no common standard well pad size. The last 5 permitted well sites have ranged from about 1 acre up to 2.3 acres. So we don't have one size fits all. There is research that one well pad drilling, we don't have any of these, but in other locations, up to 20 or more wells can be drilled from a single surface location, which is a mechanism to save time and money, to not move equipment around, and then it has a smaller impact overall on the landscaped area. We did find that Fort Worth requires waivers to be filed in the county records, and so our draft now requires an amendment. Staff has drafted an amendment requiring the waiver to be filed in the county clerks, and no additional waiver is required if the well is to be drilled on a currently permitted 10-acre well site. And we do require all our well sites currently to be a minimum of 10 acres. So,
The waiver for the fencing, is that what you're talking about?
no waiver for drilling.
Extra
Put in another hole.
boring, doing more.
So the waivers, they'll last forever?
If you remember, Councilmember, we had the Finley Resources that had the question about, they drilled an initial well, a home was to be constructed on the neighboring parcel, and they are now in a position to ask for a waiver from that property owner for any subsequently drilled wells on their 10-acre site. They asked us to look at something like this. The amendment that you have in front of you is what staff came up with. If you all want to consider that and move forward with it, it would allow additional wells to be drilled on the same well site without additional waivers. When a company comes in to get a permit for oil and gas well, they have to show us down to what 10-acre site they're going to be drilling on. And so that's what we used when we drafted it instead of a well pad definition, because when we were looking, that size varied, it was hard to narrow it down. Does that answer your question?
The waiver lasts forever?
Yes. It would be filed in the county property records, that way if you were a successive purchaser, you could go and that would be there for you to know and realize that that waiver was existing.
The waiver transfer from one operator to another?
To be specific to the property owner. Now, certainly if an operator wanted to plug their well and move and they wanted to release the waiver, they could do that. But it would be specific to the property.
Saying the waiver runs with the land.
Yes.
I think that's only fair. I mean, you can't keep changing the rules. Because there's been a property that's exchanged hand from one owner to another owner. I guess one question I would have is are new purchasers of property, are they notified that a waiver has been granted? So that when you buy your property and it's next to an existing oil pad that has a waiver,
Yeah,
that ought to be a consideration for the new buyer.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we're trying to address by requiring it to be filed with the county real estate records. So that when they do
So
a
it would be
title
attached
search,
to the title.
right, then they do a title search to see what impacts that property, and that filing that attaches to that particular property, the county records should come out, and that should get the notice.
Okay, the particular case that we discussed that came before council, where the people had owned the land, they'd sold some land, I think, to the drilling company, and now they want to build, and so there's the oil well's already there, but the issue is, when you do a waiver, does that say for as many wells as they want to bore? Is that what the waiver says? Because if that is the case, and you built your house, and then there are 3, 5, 7, 8, that is a lot of disruption to someone's living space. If you have trucks coming in and you have the engines and I mean, if the people would be willing to waiver as many, wells as they want to drill on that site, then I guess it would be fine. But is the waiver specific about a well right now? Is that what it is?
It's specific about a pad site, a 10-acre pad site. So as many wells that were economically feasible by the oil company to put on that pad site site, they can do that. And this would be
But
prospective.
these people have not done a waiver. That's the
That's
whole
right.
issue.
That's right, so this would be
Okay.
prospective.
All right.
So if the oil company then wanted to come to these particular people and negotiate a waiver that covered the pad site, which they didn't do beforehand, they could do that prospectively, but it would impact their situation right now.
Okay. I just want to make sure that the waiver is clear, that they are saying you can come in and do as many as you can do on this site. That-
There's many years apart.
I guess.
So what if I get a waiver from,
You don't have to sign a waiver.
Yeah.
right, no, I get that, that's what I'm gonna ask. What if I get a waiver from the neighboring property owner, and I got my well site established, and then that neighboring property changes hands, maybe somebody built something over there. The new owners, what are they? They just have to, they just need to know that this land was granted a waiver.
When they buy it, when they
So
purchase
buyer
it.
beware.
Well, that's the reason we're having it filed with the county real estate records, so when they get ready to purchase it, and assuming there's financing involved in the purchase, may not be, but normally there is, then they're gonna require a title opinion, and they're gonna require title insurance, and so that would have to be noted by the attorney doing the title opinion, that here's a document that runs with this land that's been filed, so they would get their notice that way.
No, it's just buyer beware. You need to know that you may be next to a wellhead and tank battery today, but in the future, you have no say in a new drilling operation going out on that site. That'll just be something else.
If you chose to buy property that had a waiver attached to it, that's what you'd be buying, is that risk. So you'd have to assess that
Right.
on deciding whether or not to buy that property or not.
Right, I get the buyer beware part. I mean, you can probably go see the well site. I'm gonna live next to that, I understand that. But you have to then be able to know that what I'm really waiving is not the site, it's the drilling operation. It's the trucks, the dairies, the chemicals, whatever else goes along with that, that you can't see when you're buying the property.
As a purchaser, if that was a critical issue for you, you may not want to purchase that land, that's right.
I think we're asking a lot of people by the waivers being permanent. I think we're really anticipating a lot.
Are they paid for the waiver? Or it's just an agreement? Is there a
Well, that would
financial
be-
gain for the property owner if they do the
It would be
waiver?
up to the property owner, I would suspect that there would be some consideration, change hands for the waiver.
Well, I'm thinking about it in terms of, right now, we have a number of people living in neighborhoods where we have pipelines running through and beside, and people are really upset about it. But the fact is, somebody sold that easement and had a financial gain, and, now those companies own that land. So I guess I'm just asking.
Pipelines, easements are filed of record also. So when a purchaser comes in to buy that property, normally on a title opinion, there'll be a list of exceptions of what the title insurance company is not going to insure against. And if there's a easement of record, pipeline easement, for example, then that will show up on your title.
They should have been told when they closed on the property. They should have been told that information.
The law says filing in the county records is sufficient notice.
So the next steps that, where we could head in with this is if this committee finalizes its review and recommendation this evening, then this draft ordinance can be scheduled for a full council review at a study session in January. And then if that proceeds, then we could have a draft ordinance before council in February for first and second readings. Or that was,
Some of us have gotten a question about, I think it's on page 3 of the draft ordinance, there was material that's struck through, and the question is, why was that struck through?
Oh, that was struck through, Mayor, because those items are already submitted with, the Oklahoma Corporation Commission land application, which is listed as item number 7 on page 2.
there redundant filing the
Yeah, it was
required.
redundant language and I think then confusing because there is no difference between what we received in the Oklahoma Corporation Commission and we receive all that and therefore we're getting all that information just through that other process which is identified here. That must be
So
submitted.
nothing has been eliminated
No,
in this process.
absolutely not.
If the Corporation Commission changes their rules, then
Well, we would, if they eliminated things, we would have to look at and see if we needed to add something to our permit process, but right now they were identical.
yes, if they're identical, I don't see where that's confusing. I just do one thing. You want a copy, here you go, and if they want a copy, there they go. Kind of like when I figure my income on my taxes, I get I let the state know, and let the fed, that's my income, I add it up on.
We're just trying to clean up the language so that we're not being repetitious in our ordinances.
But they're already saying it. They're saying that we get all that information because that's part of the Corporation Commission process.
The concern is that they'll decide not to.
Seems unlikely, but
Well, they seem to be changing rules on a regular basis to roll things back.
And then we don't have any say.
Well, they may change this too, that's always a concern. So I'm concerned about it.
Okay, I have read over this, I've met with the staff, I've read over it again, and I've read over it again, and I've been given information from several different sources on the Maryland initiative, and I got some information today, and pretty much everything that we've been asked about, we've made the adjustment. That doesn't mean that we've done everything we need to do, but as far as these particular ordinances, I think the staff's done a really good job of going back in, researching it, and making some improvements. I feel much better about the street corridors. I think that is a really good way to go. So, are we ready to take this on? We do not make a decision about this. We make a decision whether or not we send it on to the full council, whether we send it back to staff to study more. Personally, I feel like we're ready to send it on to the council for their input.
It's not perfect, but we think we made a lot of changes. Made a lot of progress. I think some others.
Do you have some specific things now the staff might look at?
No, nothing has.
We did get some suggestions pretty late on, which I would like the staff to at least look at. So for example, under the definition of a disposal or injection well, we have some language that says it's different from the point of extraction or production thereof. I'm not sure that a simpler definition could be adopted here along the lines that some of the input we got, that just to simply say it's any well drilled or actually used for injection of salt water or other substances into the earth. I'm not sure what the reason for that, saying different from a point of extraction, what somebody's calling into question here is whether or not you could drill a regular well and then later on use it as an injection well.
well, you could not. I mean, I have this information and looked through it this afternoon, but this is old language. We didn't amend this definition as we move forward in this process. So the point is that an injection well would not be at the same point of extraction as an oil well. It would be different.
Maybe they're suggesting can an extraction well be later converted, repurposed to be an injection well?
An oil well cannot be.
So I think as we go forward, I mean, I know, again, you all did not have time, as neither did we. Some of these, I think, maybe are just answering the questions, clarifying material here. But I mean, I agree with Councilmember Miller. I think, we're ready to, I would like that, information on insurance, to come to the full council for some discussion.
Councilmember Jungman. Okay. At this time, if we have some comments from the audience, we'd be glad to recognize you if you stand and tell us your name and who you represent. Mayor Francis?
Yes, I've been reading through the rough draft. On your second page, section 13-1503 definitions. Subsection E, ruptures in surface casing. In the event of a rupture, break, or opening occurs in the surface casing, the permittee or the operator or drilling contractor shall take immediate action to repair it and shall report the incident to the oil and gas inspector promptly. Evidence of diagnostic testing and repair log must be presented to the oil and gas inspector prior to continuing drilling. My question is, who is on the hook here? It says the permittee or the operator or the drilling contractor. Why wouldn't it say the permittee and the operator and drilling contractor shall take joint immediate action? And what is immediate action?
Do we have a short answer there for why that would be?
And also, when it says promptly, that should be followed, I think, like within so many hours.
Okay,
And
I'm
give a
still not sure
specific
where you
time.
are.
Page 9 of the
It's
ordinance.
page 9, not, I
All I have here is, section 13, 1503 definitions.
1504, casing.
Oh, okay, this is something that, I'm sorry, you don't have the same thing that I have.
The last sentence.
Oh, okay,
So you're concerned that.
okay, do we have, did you find that section?
We
Is that part
we
of it?
found it.
So I think that the or language means that any of those, whereas if you put and language, it means all of them must take immediate action. I think the obligation is on any one of the three, the permittee, the operator, or the drilling contractor. However, I do agree with the suggestion that promptly is a little, there's prompt and there's prompt. And then, so I think some period of time, 24 hours, 48 hours, seems to be appropriate.
So we can get more specific. Okay, someone else? Yes, ma'am, and then Casey.
Yeah, I'm Catherine Rand. I'm also a resident in Norman. On that or versus and, when it says or, then we don't know who's responsible. And everyone can point to the other person and say, well, I thought they were doing it. I thought they were doing it. When it says and, everybody's responsible. Everybody has a stake in making sure it gets done. And that way, things get done, for sure. Rather than just saying, well, I thought somebody else did it.
We'll take a look and see if there's a way to clarify that. Mr. Holcomb.
Casey Holcomb. I actually have several concerns about some of the changes that have been made. Specifically, I don't want to run through all of my email to some of the council members about this already, but it does not seem like a good idea. It seems like backpedaling to actually strike the language prohibiting diesel engines to power well pumps and equipment. Oklahoma City still prohibits this. A lot of cities prohibit this. So why is Norman backpedaling on this? There's language striking the prohibition on diesel engines. There's, what page is it? Section 13-1509.
B.
B. And the Oklahoma City regulations are really rather comprehensive. I would recommend if 13-1509B.
09B.
And the draft ordinance. I mean, this
Right.
request was made, I think, in relation to the waiver issue that was raised at the previous meeting, because Finley Resources had complained that it would not be possible for them to power their equipment by electric motors. Was that change the result of their request?
Okay, so if you'll turn to page 20, section 131521, that actually controls motive power. And it reads, motive power for all well pumping equipment shall be electricity, provided however that, in respect to wells in operation with non-electric pumping equipment and which do not have the capability for electric power, the oil and gas inspector shall have the authority to waive the requirements of this section if he determines in a particular case that electric pumping equipment is not necessary to protect the public health, safety, or welfare. That's existing language that hasn't been changed, so we do require electric power.
Well, I don't think that needs to be waived. I think the language should be kept as is. It seems to me that it's actually, striking that language is actually weakening the ordinance. I don't understand why that should be done. It seems like I said, it seems like reversing course. I thought we were trying to make progress here and make things more safe for residents that have to live near these toxic sites.
Well, my understanding is that is what we have, because we require electric motors. There may be a case where you have something that's very isolated, where that's not a big issue. I don't think we're waiving the requirement. We're just
The
saying that there
regulations
might be a,
Regulation specifically says you can get a waiver. So Kathy Canty, I don't understand why there would be a need for that. There's all sorts of alternative powers, solar power, wind power. Maybe that the site can be moved, I mean, I'm just saying, that's an existing regulation. I think when he saw it struck, he thought it was removed completely. So I think probably feel better that it's in there, but the waiver power, I'm not sure that it shouldn't be considered. But that's,
Could be possible. The other concern I had was about the soil farming. Nothing in our new ordinance or the revisions to the ordinance are addressing that in any way, and that's actually a very harmful practice that is banned by other municipalities in Oklahoma. Oklahoma City, for instance, does not allow drilling muds to be spread over the land, and especially if we're addressing regulations and stream planning corridors. There are currently soil farming sites, very recently permitted on Indian Hills Road, where they have done this soil farming, and that's not something that a lot of cities permit, and I don't see why we should be permitting it either. Not in the Little River watershed, not in the Lake Thunderbird watershed, not anywhere.
okay? Dr. Ellis?
So I was wondering about Steve Ellis. I was wondering about the position of the oil and gas inspector. It seems like the oil and gas inspector is getting some increased sort of responsibility here. And I was wondering if there's any way to sort of add some additional oversight. It was unclear to me from when I looked at all that sort of stuff, even where the oil and gas inspector is and sort of the organizational chart of the city and what the requirements are to be the oil and gas inspector. I mean, they're making judgments about waivers of various kinds. So it looks like they're doing it sort of by their own judgment. So I was wondering if there was anything we could add about who the oil and gas inspector has to answer to for those judgments.
Okay, well, that's pretty much a personnel matter now. We can always.
I don't mean any particular person, I mean the position.
Right,
oil and gas
yes,
inspector,
I
right?
understand that,
Yeah.
but still who people report to, but we can certainly look at if there's language that is more specific. We don't want to just leave it up in here. Yes, Mr. Rayner.
Yeah, Mike Rayner. Point of clarification on what Mary Frances had to say. In the and or the or argument, you're citing a drilling contractor. If you have an incident where you have a breach in the surface casing and it's 5 years after the well's been breached, I don't see how you can hold the drilling contractor liable. They've done their job, they're gone. So I think you need to kind of focus. It needs to be somehow timed to the point in the life of the well. So you probably need to maybe look a little closer on that language. Clarifying that. Yeah, it should be, and what's the difference between the permittee and the operator? I mean, the operator of the well, whoever's operating the well is gonna be listed with the Corporation Commission, they're the party that should be responsible.
Anybody else?
I have one more request. I'm the Cleveland County Local Emergency Planning Committee Chairman.
Okay.
We recently have not been able to get Plains All-American to provide our Emergency Planning Committee a copy of their emergency operating procedure. So what would be helpful to our planning group is if you could provide in section 13-1501B, make a 15, you can insert it right there, that the company needs to submit their emergency operating plan and allow the local emergency planning committee to have a copy of that. We're currently working with DEQ and we've contacted Region 6. We'll be sending out a certified letter. We've been trying to deal with them for 3 weeks and they just won't give us the information. So we'll work with EPA, but if you provided that, got that, and provided to the local emergency planning committee, then we could plan. So you would consider that. That's where you would insert it and it'd fit right there. And then back to the land application, what Oklahoma City does is so that it isn't land applied, which you can do on farmer sites or different locations, you can do landfill and pay a fee for that, which helps cover the cost for the environmental damage, or probably not popular, but injection well are the two options I think that Oklahoma City has. So rather than it going on someone's farm and being land applied and that being checked, I think those are better options to be put in the permitting process. So just consider that, please.
Yes. Anyone else?
I did
I
wanna-
think, well, okay.
Okay, I'll keep it short. The one thing I did want to mention is that Oklahoma City actually has a special zoning overlay for drilling sites, and if a company wants to drill outside that zoning district, they actually have to come before, well, I guess they're equivalent of the Norman's Planning Commission, and take this before the public. So why don't we do that here? So if people have concerns about this, they can actually address that in a public forum, and it's more accountability, it's more oversight. It just seems like a much more transparent way of doing business, and I think we should consider creating a special zoning overlay.
Go ahead. Okay.
Cindy Rogers, first, I wanted to thank you for the hard work, and I guess did a lot of work. We're fielding lots of input, so I very much appreciate that. I apologize for the late hour, which you got my comments, but, you know, day job, that's all I can say. Two points, I'll be brief. One of them is, should we think about setbacks from the water areas? I mean, if you're right on the edge, is that enough? Should we have some setbacks
Well, that's
from?
why we're using the stream planning corridors, because that's kind of what it provides, a setback. I mean,
Right,
it's
so-
a natural setback.
I'm just asking if we need some setback
And we have-
from that, or if that's
We have
sufficient?
300 feet setback from water wells, we've got the 600 feet from buildings, rooftop.
Okay, and then the other thing is, when we think about setbacks, should we consider like HUD does in terms of if it's a bigger tank or a bigger operation, you need bigger setback, but if it's a smaller tank, maybe you don't need as big a set tank, and so maybe that might be helpful for, as opposed to a one-size-fits-all sort of issue.
Okay, I haven't seen that in anything I've looked at, but that, okay, got that down? All right. Ms. Hampton, or you let this gentleman?
Gentleman go first. I don't want to ask something somebody else is going to ask.
My name's Steve Ramsey. I'm the owner of Edinger Engineering. We operate of the Little Axe Barnesville Sand Unit, which is out east of Norman.
Okay.
I also want to compliment you on your work. I know you guys have made an effort. I read this thing through 2 or 3 times after I got it. There's a lot of confusion to me. I haven't drilled a well on those leases since 1977. So a lot of the stuff that's looks like is really has to do with new drilling and regulations regarding that. So I found several places where I wasn't sure if I was compelled or not compelled, whether you were talking about a new well or an old well. So I think you need to kind of look at that a little bit. And I could take you to it, but I don't want to take up all your time here.
I am sure that somebody on legal staff would be glad if you wanted to give them something where you had noted,
I had lots of notes, I just didn't want to take them all.
if you want to make a copy of that, and I'm sure that they could,
You also referenced the current urban service area, 2025 land use.
correct.
That wasn't included in the material that we got. Is there a map of that?
There is.
Is that available to the public?
Yes.
Can we get a copy of it?
Yes. It's
And then,
probably on the website.
It is on the website, under
It
the Planning and Community Development Department.
okay. Because there are some differences referenced on whether you're in that area or not.
Okay.
Okay. And then, in regard, on page 18, item has to do with notification. This is kind of an example here. I think it says that if I'm going to work on a well, I need to provide you 14 days notice. Now, I have to believe that you're talking about moving in a drilling rig or doing something. I mean, if I have a well go down, I can't wait 14 days to get a rig out there to pull that well and replace the pump. So, again, I couldn't tell if I'm subject to that. And then your inspector gets 10 more days, I think. So that's 21 days I'm down, because there's only one road on 156. That's the only road they could come down. So I don't know exactly what the route would be. But are you saying that we need to go through and get an approved plan that is going to be our transportation routes for everything, and I need to do that? Or, because I can't wait to every time I have a problem to go 14 days.
We need some clarification on that.
And I think you're talking about moving heavy equipment, that's what I assumed from it, but it's another place where it's not clear if I'm an operator with a certain mechanical responsibility every day. I'm not drilling wells, so I don't really care about that kind of cartage that's going in and out. I'm sure they do. They probably have a lot more input on that than I do. Okay, and then the final thing I wanted to comment on was, I think it's on 13, 15, 12, it's page 15, where you're talking about on storage tanks, that I've got to replace my earthen berms that have held containment since 1970, that I'm going to have to scrape those and build a concrete wall. And again, I don't know if that applies to me or if you're applying this to new wells, but new wells only. That is very unclear to me when I read that. And when I asked Mr. Woods, he said, no, you're going to have to do that. So I don't know if that was his interpretation as well. So
Okay, we want to go.
that will cost me $250,000 to lay a tarp underneath existing tanks that have been there since 1970.
We're talking about people's health.
That's right, don't tell.
You're what?
We're talking about people's health, trying to make
I
it
think the
safe.
majority of the discussion needs to allow
Yeah,
comments on
right,
the chair.
Okay.
no.
Well,
And
what
right
I'm
now,
saying is
he's just making a
the
point
earthen
about
berm is
clarification.
as good a containment as the concrete. I have, those wells have been out there since 1977. Occasionally, you'll get a breach, but the breaches are small leaks. We have pumpers there every day. Those get fixed quickly, and they're easy to fix. So I would argue that an earthen containment is as good a quality. It meets the EPA's requirements for spill plans, in which all of us have already met those requirements for our leases. So I just think you need to be sure that that's not clear. It wasn't clear to me.
I see, and that's a good
Yeah.
point for us to work on the language.
Right.
Yes, sir.
That's all I have.
This is, okay, thank
As
you.
far as,
This is the
as far as
last
the
one.
concrete barriers, we've seen some that have cracks in them, and as an operator, I suggest you go with the new aluminum. They're galvanized, they're lined, and it's a metal containment ring, and I think it's a much more effective protection device. It's cheap. It's not a question of being cheap or whatever, but you know, if there is a tremor in the ground, if ground settles, the concrete can crack, and it allows for a crack in the cement. But the metal containment rings, which a lot of us have been going to, have been a much better, it's a cleaner looking, better containment system. safer.
And I would say that if I was drilling a new well, I would probably look at both of those options as opposed to the earthen, but I didn't have that option in 1977 when those wells were drilled.
Well, most of this applies to new wells. But sir, your name for the record?
Ron Irvine.
Thank you. All right. Yes. Oh, yes, we'll let the press speak, but Councilmember Holman has something to say.
You get a
Right,
year.
right, so, other than that, what can affect wells and crews in the cities? Just
All right, did everybody hear that?
Just no.
No.
The only retroactive thing that we have put in here has to do with the fencing. The rest of the, I think that's right, the rest of what we worked on all has to do with new drilling.
And the fencing, there's a year to come into compliance.
Right. Yeah, I was really focused on fencing until I read the stuff about the berms, and I thought, well, I don't need to worry about spending $15,000, I've got to spend $50,000 instead.
Okay, all right.
Joy Hampton, Norman transcript. When all of this started, one of the strongest statements I heard you guys making was that we need to get rid of this ability to waiver the 600 foot or whatever it is setback from homes. And it sounded like council was very committed to saying, let's get rid of that waiver. We all know that things always change. That's why you're always changing the land use plan. And any of us who have ever bought property know anecdotally, we find out things like a day or two before you close or at closing. After you've spent months or even a year looking for a piece of property, you know, anecdotally, I know that I found out like maybe 2 days before, if that almost my entire backyard are utility right-of-ways. So at that point, am I gonna not buy this house I've now spent months investing in working toward this closing? And so I guess my question is, given that the waivers are permanent, that we know things always change, and Norman is gonna continue to grow, why are we backtracking on, what's the reasoning behind adding the waiver back in? What happened to that commitment that I heard early on? Did I misunderstand?
They've been able to, the property owners have been able to waive that all along.
But in our earliest discussions, what, did I mishear that we were gonna get rid of that ability to waiver?
Well, you can't take that away from them. That is the property owner's right to waive. I mean, they have to make the decision that they're gonna waive that.
But it's
Not us.
forever. It affects all future property owners, not just that one. So you're saying you can't legally take that waiver away?
Yeah, that
There's
was the
no-
question, which waiver you're talking about here. If you're talking about the fencing waiver,
That's
in
different than
the urban service area, there's no waiver required. But outside the urban, or allowed, excuse me, outside of the urban service area, then a waiver can be given if it's outside of the current
And that's on the
service
fence.
So you can,
Right.
you could do a,
But
you
on
could do a
the,
well
go again on
site,
the waiver.
you could drill a well site in the urban service area within 600 feet of the line. So there's the question.
yeah, well, and thanks for that clarification. So we're talking about two different waivers. One is fencing, and you're
One
saying
is drilling.
in the urban service area, you cannot, there's no longer waivers for the fencing. But
Correct.
there's still a waiver for the drilling?
Well, they have to have 10 acres to drill, so I'm not sure where they would do that.
Unplatted.
Yeah,
In the urban
unplatted,
service.
so they really can't do that in the current urban service area. They can't really drill there.
Okay.
I mean, so it's already, when we talk about overlays and everything, all that's already protected here in Norman because of the requirements of the plating and the acres.
How many acres outside, within city limits, but outside the urban service area are we talking about?
They have to have.
No, I mean, how many exist? How many acres? Because we're continuing to develop.
We can find that out, I don't have that number this evening.
Well, and I guess I should point of clarification to the urban service area. We know, we also have the future urban service area, so we have an idea of where growth may happen. This follows that urban service area as changes.
Yes.
For wells going forward.
Right.
Now, if you had a well that was drilled that was outside the current service
Right.
area, and then the city grew around it, similar to the Monterey edition, then the requirement is that you put the fence in, but you don't have to remove the well, because the well was drilled legally at the time it was
Right.
drilled. Right, but as you grow out there, then there may be a mandatory fencing requirement that you cannot waive.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay. I said that that would be the last one. Councilmember Jungman.
Yeah, I have a couple. So in the scenario you mentioned, so they secured the waivers, because they, even though they're in the urban sector, could they drill again on that side? Have they secured the waivers? They probably could, right? That's kind of what I'm worried about, is that things change sufficiently and they have to drill again, but I think I'm the only one worried about that. Maybe there's more worry about the drilling mode question, and, so I see here in the comparison chart, which is really handy, I appreciate that being put together, that Oklahoma City, there's a reference to state license disposal site. We don't have that reference under ours. What is a state license disposal site?
She's on this chart.
Disposal mud,
It's down here.
It's below halfway down.
Disposal of mud.
Yeah, that may be a better question for operators. Can operators help us with that?
What is the question? You can barely hear back here.
It says, this is in disposal of mud. And in Oklahoma City, disposal of drilling mud shall be by transporting the mud to a state licensed disposal site.
Well, basically what that is, all drilling mud must be disposed in a state licensed disposal site, whether or not it's in a city. That's a state law, state part of the Regulations Corporation Commission. They've simply acknowledged needlessly the state law. And so a state licensed disposal site is a place where you can take drilling mud that is properly developed and has, is monitored by the state for disposal of drilling floods. And those can be done, in some cases, they're done in evaporation pits so that the water that is a part of that is evaporated back into the atmosphere, and the materials are recovered and reused. Sometimes it's pumped down the well, depends again on the disposal well. Other times it might be soil farmed, and because nearly all of the recovered material from a frac flow back and stuff like that is inert and benign and can be spread out, and it's basically sand to begin with.
So the soil farming sites are state licensed disposal sites, is what you're saying?
Soil farming in evaporation pits and disposal wells.
They have to be.
So
They're all-
any
right,
place
there
you
is no
take
place
the
you can
mud
do
has
that.
to be state
Right,
licensed?
that's a go to jail deal if you don't do it at a state licensed disposal
Okay.
site.
All right, that is
So,
very
I mean,
helpful.
you can put it in the ordinance, but it's meaningless, it's already state law. There's no need to be redundant.
Okay, great.
Yeah, the state might change it though.
They write it in their ordinance. It's not in the draft.
And we don't, what he's saying is
State law trumps,
Right, state
yeah,
law.
state law.
State laws can
We
change.
require with a permit that you tell us how you're going to dispose of those items.
So we require knowing that they have a state licensed place to dispose of their mud.
That's not gonna help anything.
Okay. All right. Council, thank you very much. Good meeting. We're ready to move ahead. This will go into a study session of the council. Or I don't know.